Hello, everyone, and welcome to You Don't Have to Do It All, the Leader's Guide to Self-Value and Delegation. In this 45-minute program, you'll learn how to become the leader that your team needs, how to let go of the work that you've delegated to them, and how to have a life outside of work. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate you spending this time on yourself and with me, and I do hope you've marked off this time. Take this time for you. Be in a quiet place, stay focused, turn off your phone ringer and your email notifications, and just be here in the present, in this space, for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm Susan Baroncini-Moe, and I'll be leading this webinar today, as well as the others in this series. I'm an executive coach with over 16 years experience working primarily with successful women who are executives, entrepreneurs, and other high performers. I have a master's degree in social psychology, and I have spent, and I continue to spend, a lot of time in training to keep my skill set fresh. I'm the author of the book Business in Blue Jeans: How to Have a Successful Business on Your Own Terms in Your Own Style. I've worked with clients on 4 continents over the years in a wide variety of industries, and just a few fun facts about me. I held the Guinness World Records title for the world's longest uninterrupted live webcast for 2.5 years. I've tried over 100 hobbies. I play the violin and have for 38 years. I'm on the board of directors for the Junior League of Indianapolis, and I've read over 2,500 books on the subjects of personal development and personal growth, leadership, entrepreneurship and business, psychology, coaching, wellness, networking, relationships, interpersonal dynamics, philosophy, and management. And yes, delegation used to be a problem for me. I really struggled to delegate because I would always get back poor quality work or no work. And I always thought, why am I doing this? Why can't they just give me the work I want? Why can't they give me results? And more importantly, when will I get to have a life again? Because I have to do everything myself. I felt like I did so much, and it was somehow still never enough. I felt like no one else valued my time or my desire to have a personal life, and I was really resentful. But it turned out that a few tweaks helped me to turn things around, and those tweaks are the things I'm going to share with you today. Now, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to talk about what happens when you don't delegate. We'll talk about why you think you have to do it all and why you struggle to delegate. And we'll also talk about how to delegate so you can be happier and enjoy the rest of your life today. Now, from time to time today, I'll pause so that you can do some work in the workbook that is linked to in the comments and also in the blog post. We'll also try something a little different today. We've posted a few webinars recently, and what we're going to do today is I'd like to include some time for discussion so that if you're watching this with a colleague or a peer or a friend, you can have some time to talk to each other about delegation and about your experience. Now, the only way for it to work is if you aren't shy with each other. So we'll see how it goes. I hope you do have time. If you don't have someone to discuss this with, you're going to have a little time in here that you can work on your workbook a little more. And so when you see the discussion slides come, just take that quiet time and go ahead and jump into your workbook. Let's go ahead and dive in. We are here to talk about a serious problem, and that's work hoarding. You hoard work. It's time to admit it. Signs that you're a work hoarder include you feel overwhelmed a lot. You don't spend nearly enough time at home or doing things you enjoy. Your team kind of doesn't have enough to do. You kind of notice that they have time to do other stuff and they're not swamped with work. You may have been accused of micromanaging from time to time. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So what happens when we don't delegate? What are some of the consequences of failing to delegate? Well, first of all, you work long hours while your team goes home, and you find yourself feeling pretty resentful as a result. You work too much, and your family and your personal life get neglected. You are so tired, you're exhausted, and you're annoyed at everyone. You're irritable, and you're irritated, and you start to feel like a martyr. You start to take on a martyr status. And not only that, but you begin to make mistakes. So I would like for you to take a minute now, a minute or so, to talk about delegation. Share some of your stories and your frustrations around delegation. And I'm going to mute my mic and give this a little bit of time so that you can talk to each other. If you are alone and watching this, please go ahead and jump into your workbook in the beginning of your workbook. But we'll have another moment where we take some time for the workbook. So go ahead and have your conversation, have a little discussion, and I'll be back in about a minute or two. Okay. If you're in a group setting and you need a little more time to have your discussion around delegation, go ahead and pause the video and continue to your discussion, but try not to continue too long. We want to stay on the clock. All right. Now we're going to take a moment for workbook time. The questions that I want you to look at are, do you struggle to delegate? What are some of the consequences that you personally experience as a result of not delegating? And also, what are some of your frustrations around delegating? And it is super important that you have printed out your workbook. And again, if you're watching this video on the blog, you'll see in the blog there's a link to the workbook for downloading. And if you're in YouTube watching this, there's a link in the comments or in the description of the video. It is important that you print them out. You actually handwrite the answers. There is actually research that shows there's something tangible that connects handwriting to your brain more effectively than typing connects to your brain. And so you will actually remember this content more. You'll remember what you've written. You'll remember what you've shared. So actually do handwrite the answers out. I'm going to mute my mic for 1 minute. And that should give you some time to get started on some of these questions. Now, you will not get all of the workbook questions done during the webinar, but I do want you to get a good start on them and to really get into the meat of this, and then you can come back and finish afterwards. So we're going to take about a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. All right, let's talk about why you think you have to do it all. First of all, you're a woman. Okay, you may not be, you might be a guy watching this. I understand that. But if you're a woman, I know it might seem a little sexist for me to just, and honestly, if you know me, you know that's not who I am, okay? But here's the reality. Sociologically speaking, the research shows that women delegate far less than men do. As women, we're raised to believe we should do it all, that we should be superwoman. And that's the expectation we have of ourselves. We're supposed to manage the home and do the work in the office and do extra stuff and even do the stuff we could delegate, but it doesn't seem very nice to delegate. And will my team like me if I give them more work? And shouldn't I be able to handle everything anyway? Like, we have these sort of ingrained ideas that We should be able to handle it all, and we should be superwoman. And so a part of this is you're a woman and you've been trained. This is who you should be. You don't want to ask for help. We don't ask for help. We tend not to speak up when we do need help. And if we do, we're afraid we'll be seen as weak. This plays into our imposter syndrome, where we feel like if we ask for help, we'll be much more likely to be discovered as fraudulent. And if that rings true for you, take some time out to watch the imposter syndrome webinar that I posted a couple of weeks ago. It's on the blog. It's also on YouTube. And if you are concerned about feeling like an imposter, if you're concerned about someone finding you out if you ask for help and finding out you're a big fraud, then that's a good webinar for you to watch. We don't know really what delegation actually is. We have this idea that delegation is handing off our dirty work, and we think it's handing off the drudgery to someone else below us. But I want you to have a perspective shift here. Delegating work is actually empowering to others because it allows them to develop their skills. It's a means of leveraging the talents of your team. So it's a different thing than you think it is. There's also an issue of ego. And there are a few parts to this. The first one is, for appearance's sake, looking really busy makes me look important. It also makes me feel important. Being the go-to expert, it feels really important. People ask you questions and come to you for expertise. And giving that up takes confidence and it takes perspective. It can be even more challenging in companies where producing the core deliverable is what people seem to respect. So that's going to be a challenge if you work in a company like that. But in most cases, you'll still be delivering the final product anyway. You still want to give your team credit, but even when you do, we tend to associate the deliverer with success. So that's something you can take some comfort in. The third part of ego is you have this idea that my work is better than everybody else's. When you see your work as higher quality than other people's work, it becomes very difficult to delegate your projects, your work to other people to do when you just know their work is going to be subpar. And the research indicates, this is an interesting thing, the research indicates there's a tendency for managers to evaluate a work product more highly the more involved they are in its production. So if I'm really involved in the project, I'm going to rate the quality of the work much more highly. So are you sure your work is better? And how much better? Is it worth the difference? Is it worth it, giving up so much of yourself in your life? Something to think about. We think we can do it better ourselves, so we do everything ourselves. We also have a lack of trust. Now, we've all had bad experiences with delegation. Somebody didn't come through, somebody missed a deadline, or they did a bad job, and it can be very hard to trust after that's happened. You like it my way or the highway, and you're kind of unwilling for things to be done differently than the way you would do them. You know best, and the only way things should be done is the way you do it, right? I think we can all admit to that one. And sometimes you really like what you do and you just don't want to give it up. You enjoy the work. Now, I felt this way when I launched my first business and I was transitioning from a web development career into an executive coaching business. I didn't want to delegate developing my website, in part because I could do it, but also I really liked doing it. But for me to focus on growing the business and growing as a coach, I had to give it up. I had to delegate it and let it go. And it's important to note that I had to give up the low leverage activities. We're going to talk about this in a minute. I had to delegate low leverage activities that didn't require my unique skill set in favor of things that did require my unique skill set. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Another thing is, I don't want to share the glory. Secretly, first of all, we fear that other people will do work better than we do, and that they'll get the recognition and they'll make us look bad. Nobody wants to be upstaged by their subordinates, right? And we also don't always want to share the credit. Here's the thing that's really interesting. It's a strange phenomenon I've seen again and again. And I think this is the thing that is so fascinating about the fears we have versus the reality. You have a team complete a task that you've delegated to them. Then you bring back the final product and you still give credit to your team, but people over time will forget that a team did that work And if you know how social psychology works, and now you do, you can actually let all of this go, because not only will you be seen as a more adept leader when you give credit where it's due, but you'll also get the majority, if not all, of the glory. So your fears that you'll have to share the glory are unfounded, because in the reality, you'll be remembered for leading that task. Now, another reason why people don't like to delegate is because they haven't seen a good model for delegation that actually results in getting good work. And it's quite possible that you've seen a lot of models where it fails, and you think, and you've experienced it as well, so you think this delegation thing is nonsense. Now, maybe you're not great at seeing the potential in your staff and seeing the things that they don't see in themselves. You have to encourage them, and occasionally you have to shove them out on a limb so that they can learn to lead themselves. And sometimes we're afraid they'll try to do more than they're asked, aren't we? We give someone a task to do, right? And we say we want them to have ingenuity and be resourceful and take initiative, but God help the ones who do, because now you've done too much. You've gone too far. It's a tricky balance, right? So we kind of don't have a good model for how to have people delegate and how we do it successfully. A lot of times you don't have the time or energy to train your team, and delegation does require mentoring, coaching, training, and those things do take time and energy. As you delegate more, though, you'll free up the time to do those things. We've talked about a lot of fears already, but another one is you're afraid that delegating might be admitting failures or limitations. You're afraid people will think you can't handle your job, or you're not interested in your job. And you might even be afraid people won't like you if you delegate work to them. And of course, you feel safer when you can control the outcome. You feel like it's better this way. I can kind of control what's going on. Another reason is hiring. If you haven't hired well, then you have a team you can't delegate to. And you can teach skills, but you can't teach traits or culture. If you have a team that doesn't have the work ethic or the sense of gratitude that they have a good job, if they don't have the ability to take initiative and be resourceful, those are things that are very difficult to train. And good delegation really does start with hiring. If you hire a good team with delegation in mind, it's much easier to delegate. Now, ultimately, it's all about you. Lack of delegation is all about you. It's about keeping things about you and not really letting the focus be on anyone else. Now, let's take a minute or two for a discussion about why you're not delegating more and what's keeping you from delegating. So take a moment, discuss amongst yourselves. I'm going to mute my mic and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, let's take a minute also for a deep dive to look at some of the reasons you aren't delegating more or at all. So, in your workbooks, I'd like you to take a moment or so to answer the questions around why you're not delegating more and what you're afraid is going to happen if you delegate. And we'll take another minute for that. Okay, we're back. Now, we've looked at the consequences of work hoarding, and we've looked at some of the reasons why you don't want to delegate. Now we can start to look at how to delegate. And this is the critical part here, because the fact is, successful delegation, the delegating that results in you getting high quality work out of your team, is all about learning how to delegate successfully and effectively. So we're going to start with a little homework. We're going to start with a time diary. Now, I know that sounds like we're not starting with delegation, but what we're doing is we're looking for how much time is spent on low leverage activities. Remember, I said that earlier, low leverage activities that can be passed off to someone else. We're also looking for the activities that really require your presence and skill set versus what other people can handle. So for a week, a whole week, I want you to keep a time diary. And then at the end of that week, review and analyze the diary. Identify the things that you've done that are low leverage or don't really require your unique presence and skill set. So that's going to be step one. You're going to keep track of your time and then analyze it. And this is your first big homework. Those of you who are clients, you know how much I love to give homework. There's a space in your workbook to keep a time diary, and it will make a huge difference if you actually do it. Now, as you analyze your time, I also want you to think about, as you identify those low leverage tasks, think about how you would feel if you delegated some of those things. Think about how it would, what you would experience. And thinking about it may create some anxiety, and that's okay. And that's why we move on to step 2. We need to get your brain on board, and this is a big one because it's hard. You spent a long time feeling like you had to do it all. You felt like, if I don't do this, it just won't get done right. So now we're going to begin to adjust to a new way of thinking. We're going to start with redefining delegation. Rather than passing off your dirty work or making your underlings do the drudgery, we're going to redefine delegation as leveraging the talents of your team and empowering them to develop their skill sets and to build their careers. Now, isn't that so much nicer? So we're thinking about how you can manage your time more effectively while simultaneously empowering your team members and letting them grow. So we're looking for potential in our team, we're encouraging them, and yes, we're occasionally going to push them out of the nest a little bit so they can fly. So we're going to redefine your expectations as well. It's important that you consider delegation not as something that when you give someone a task, you expect it to come back perfectly the first time, but rather as a training task, something that the first time might not come back perfectly. But over time, with patience and training, a task you delegate will be one you don't have to keep worrying about. It's going to be a stretch. And it's funny, we talked about this last week in the seminar on playing a bigger game. It's funny how all these things are connected, also on YouTube and in the blog. You have to do some things that are uncomfortable at first to get where you want to be. And if you want to be in a place of being able to go home at night and do things you enjoy with your life, if you want to be able to let go of resentment and frustration, if you want to spend time with family and friends, you're going to have to be uncomfortable a little bit and learn to delegate well. And that means you're going to have to learn to trust again. I know it's hard. I know you were burned. I know someone didn't turn their work in on time. I know someone did something horrible that you had to redo. I understand. And we are going to manage that risk. And we're going to talk about how to avoid getting bad work back or getting no work back. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about how to release control and not be terrified that something terrible will happen. But now is the time to realign your thinking, because I want you to feel empowered too. It is time to take your ego out of the question. You're going to be busy, but you don't need being busy to make you feel important. You're still going to be the go-to expert. You are not losing anything here. And if you think you need these things to validate you, I do want you to go to you. I know I keep harping on these other webinars, but they're all connected. So if you think you need being the go-to expert or being busy to seem important and to validate you, go to YouTube, go to the blog, find the webinar on imposter syndrome and watch it. People suffering from imposter syndrome are among the worst at delegating. So think about that and connect the dots. I also want you to think about something. If others do something better than you, that's actually awesome. The low leverage, low hanging fruit work will be done very well. And isn't it great that you have a team that will do that low leverage work well so you can focus on high leverage work? which actually increases your value. I want you to acknowledge there are many ways to do the same task and get similar results. And I'm going to tell you something. I learned this lesson from my husband several years ago. We started sharing household tasks when we got married. And at first I would tell him, no, that's not how I do it. Over time, though, what I realized was not only did he find it less appealing more and more as I would tell him, no, that's not how I do it this way. The more I showed him how to do things my way and didn't let him discover his own ways or show me his ways, because he's a pretty smart, he's older than me. He's been doing these things longer than I have. Not only did he want to do them less, but also if I just left him alone and said, the goal at the end of this is X, while we would do things completely differently and he would take a completely different path, he would get to the same goal just as well as or better than I did. Now, that was a really powerful realization for me. And once I realized it, I decided to experiment and try things with my team. So I started to delegate things to my team in the way I'm about to show you. I experimented with strategies and different methodologies, and I found what worked. And now I'm able to delegate in a smart, effective way. And I get results. I have more free time to myself to enjoy my life. And I no longer worry about whether things are being done the way I would do them. We're going to get to that. For now, I want you to work on stretching and acknowledging that this is hard, but it's worth doing. It's also important to realign the way that you think about delegation as a whole. It's not admitting failures or limitations. People are not going to think you can't handle your job. People are not going to think you're not interested in the project. You will still be the hero. So for now, just trust me that this is true. You're going to be okay. So get ready to let go. Now, as you listen to me say these things and encouraging you to get your brain on board, what are the biggest things that that are coming up for you, and what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in delegation? So I'm going to give you a minute or two to discuss that amongst yourselves, and then I'll be back. Okay. Now, there's some space in your workbook to write out some of these challenges, and I want you to take a little bit of time to explore that individually. So, what will be the biggest challenge to you as you brace yourself to delegate? Take about a minute for that, and then we'll continue. Okay, I sure hope you guys are doing this workbook stuff because it really will help you as you navigate this path. Okay, let's talk turkey. How do you really do this thing once you're mentally ready, once you've got your brain in gear? Well, it starts with hiring. I've mentioned that a couple of times. And the first thing that's super important is hiring people you can delegate to. Now, that sounds easy. For those of you who have been hiring people for a while, you know that doesn't sound easy. I'm sure you've experienced that hiring is notoriously difficult. There are specific characteristics you really want to look for in potential employees. Skills can be taught, but traits and culture, those things are very different. Those are those little ingrained je ne sais quoi things that you can't teach. Things like gratitude, ingenuity, resourcefulness, taking initiative. These are things you really need to be looking for as you hire people. They're critical traits, and you literally need these things to be able to successfully delegate. Now, if you have a team with these traits and you have been delegating poorly or not at all, you can actually damage these traits. So you can have a team member who has resourcefulness and takes initiative, and you can squash it out of them. So it's really important that if you've been delegating poorly and you've squashed some of these traits, you're going to need to work very hard to re-inspire your team to bring these things back. It's very important. Now, if you've had some bad delegating experiences, it may not be that you're not delegating the right way. It could be that you're hiring people that you can't trust because they aren't the right people. They don't have the right traits. So you need to hire with the thought in mind, is this someone I can delegate to? Look for people who are ready to take ownership on the very first day of their job. You want to create a team of mini entrepreneurs who exist within the confines of a company structure. Now, if you came into a team that you didn't build, or you don't get to hire your own team, or you lead volunteers, you have to take what you get. And then you need to start mining for the traits you're looking for. Think about how you can stimulate conversation and encourage them to talk to you and share so you can find your core delegation partners. As you get to know your team, you'll learn to assess what you can delegate and to whom. The next step is related to orientation and training. You want to give them what they need to succeed, and they can only succeed if you understand you're going to have to lead them. You have to orient them and train them so they understand that delegation and growth is a part of their job responsibilities. And you want to start by creating and maintaining step-by-step procedure manuals for each job and making it the job of each person to maintain those manuals. This is one of the things that is the hardest to get my clients to do. People understand the importance of the manuals because they do. They create a backup plan in case someone is ill or suddenly unavailable, but they rarely actually get completed and maintained. And it's mostly because people are busy doing the work, right? But the thing is, if you can get your team to start here so that the day-to-day work is covered and everybody knows what's going on, then you can get them oriented toward the next stage, which is accepting delegated projects and tasks. As you delegate, you want to connect tasks to roles, interests, and capabilities. You're not just delegating to your assistant here and giving her tasks. You want to think about what people are interested in and what their capabilities are, as well as if the task is appropriate to their role and their level in the company. It's also important to respect and value the different talents that people bring to a work environment. There might be skills and talents that you're not even aware of. So don't be afraid to go mining. Encourage your team to tell you about their hobbies and volunteer work so you have a sense of what other skill sets they might have than what you see daily at work. Rather than thinking about delegating tasks, I want you thinking about delegating outcomes. I'm going to give you kind of a silly example here. Let's say you're trying to connect to Emerald City from the Wizard of Oz, okay? So you're going to tell your team, I want you to build a yellow brick road. It has to be made of brick, and the bricks have to be yellow. Now, aside from that, it doesn't matter to me if the road uses bridges, is curvy, is straight, as long as it's completed on time and meets the requirements I've set. So you're giving outcomes here, and you want to set expectations with respect to what parameters have to be met. You're providing timelines and requirements, but you're not telling them exactly how to get there. And that's where their growth will happen. If you tell them exactly what you want them to do, if you tell them what you want and you don't outline the outcome and give them specific guidelines and benchmarks, that's where you end up with work that doesn't meet your expectations. So if you're just saying, I want you to go do this, but you're not giving them exactly what you expect in an outcome at the end, you're going to end up with work that isn't what you were hoping for. And this may sound like a crazy thing to say, but as you outline a project and its outcomes and requirements, I actually recommend that you make sure that your team is taking notes as you meet with them. Provide this information in written form, but not complete. So you want the meeting to fill in the gaps, because all too often things get lost across timelines and people get careless. And this is one of those things that can happen super easily, especially if you aren't hiring your own team and you have a team that is, shall we say, a little less enthusiastic than they would be if you had hired them yourself and were specifically looking for delegation-friendly traits. So here's where you have to do some training. You actually have to teach them to take notes and make sure they're on the same page as you when you delegate to them. Make sure they understand the requirements. If you just give them the entire project specification in written form, I can pretty much guarantee that a team you have not chosen yourself will file it away and never read it. And this is in part because people don't respond well to spoon feeding. So being candid here, there are going to just be some people to whom you cannot delegate. Okay. So why can't you delegate to certain people? There are just some people who are perfectly happy in the positions they're in. They're not ambitious. They come to punch a clock and get paid. They don't have aspirations about their career, and they're not particularly engaged in or passionate about their work. So trying to force them into a role they're not comfortable in and that they're not interested in, trying to make them accept delegated tasks that require thought and initiative taking, it's going to be quite difficult. So instead, you have to mine for gold. Look for those team members who are the ones who will excel and are interested in growth. And this is one of your leadership challenges as you move forward. You have to assess which team members are ambitious and excited and motivated and who have the traits you're looking for, and those are going to be your leaders. Plus, you want to train those leaders to make sure their team members are paying attention and are taking notes. Now, this sounds like something I shouldn't have to say, right? Like, at the same time, it's also something that a lot of people don't know how to do. And I also don't want you to leave those other team members behind. I don't want you to say, this person isn't who I need them to be, so I'll just leave them behind. No, you never know when a switch will get turned on in someone, and you don't know why it's turned off in the first place. So you want to continue to encourage and inspire, and one day you just might find the thing that trips the person's trigger and lights or relights a spark in them that you never knew was there. So don't give up on anyone in your team because you don't know what's underneath that you might discover. Now, to delegate, you need to really let go. Don't make decisions for them. Develop their critical thinking skills so they become better at intervening in their own situations. Let them make mistakes and figure out how to correct them so they learn from them. At the same time, you don't want to be too hands-off. You may want to remain in a position to evaluate their performance and development along the way. Remember, this is a training exercise. This is a way for them to learn and grow. So you don't want to just walk away from a task that you've delegated. You want to stay involved, but still let your team member lead the way. You have to evaluate where you want to be in this continuum of hands-on versus hands-off. But the official guidance I'm giving you is you must not micromanage, because micromanaging makes them feel you don't have any confidence or faith in them. And that is the opposite message we're trying to send. Now, as I've laid out the how-tos of delegation, I'd like you to take a moment to discuss with one another, what are the feelings that come up for you, and how do you feel about delegation now? And is this a different model from what you're used to? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to talk about that. I'm going to mute the mic and I'll be back in a moment. And if you are not in an environment to have a discussion with someone else, go ahead and jump into the workbook. Okay, let's move on to the workbook. I'd like you to start writing out how you feel about delegation and how you want to delegate. What's going to be the toughest part for you? And also think about how you're going to deal with the challenges as you begin to delegate. So take another minute for that, and then we'll come back. Okay. A few other tips for successful delegation. It is critically important for you to be a work in progress. Evaluate yourself and your feelings, as well as your experiences as you go along. Begin to ask yourself questions like, could I delegate more complex tasks? Do I need to monitor progress more closely? Should I give my team more freedom? Give yourself and your team a lot of patience and kindness here. Be gentle. This is a very big shift to make. You're basically going from the I'm going to do everything because I know better than everyone and I have to do everything myself mindset to the I'm going to let people learn and grow and I'm going to help them mindset. And it's a very different perspective. It takes time and you will have projects that go awry. It's unavoidable. Okay. But that you will have mechanisms in place to head that off. This is in part something where you're going to have to learn who can handle what, and you'll discover what works and what doesn't. As an experiment, I'd like you to consider giving your team permission to call you out when you haven't delegated something that you should to keep you accountable. You want to let your team members know that they're responsible for their own growth. And if they see a project that they want to take on, they should ask for it. Now, this one's really hard for many of my clients because they're afraid that this kind of usurps their authority. But that's not how this works. You're giving your team permission to ask for growth opportunities. That's all you're doing. And that has nothing to do with your authority or your permission. It's actually a really wonderful thing. It's a very good thing. It's collaborative, and it allows your team to tell you what they think they're capable of. Most people are good at judging what they're able to handle. It's very unusual for people to have no idea what their real competencies are. It's unusual for people to not have a clear perception of themselves. And I'm not talking about maybe overreaching or stretching a little bit, but rather someone who has no idea of their competency. That's a rare thing. So it's good if you give your team permission to hold you accountable and ask you for projects they want to take on, which means you're going to get more ideas about what you might be able to delegate to them. And that's a very good thing. It will be uncomfortable at first. It'll be a stretch. This is something you're not used to doing. And knowing that you can just jump in and fix things, that's your control mechanism that keeps you from feeling anxious and afraid. It's okay to feel those feelings and to still let go. And I'm going to encourage you to not jump in and fix things at the first sign of trouble. Let your team grow. Let them grow through solving their own challenges. Remember, every project won't be perfect. You're going to have challenges and failures. Because you'll have benchmarks when your team checks in with you, you'll be able to coach and mentor them. So if they get off track, you can help guide them to get back on track. You don't have to jump in and fix it. You can guide them. So, the key takeaways that I want you to remember most from today are that delegating is not easy, but remember it always starts with hiring. And once you start hiring with delegating in mind, it will get much easier. I want you to orient and train your team and mine your team for skill sets. Remember to delegate outcomes and be very specific about the results that you want. And be willing to let go and let your ego go as well. These are the most important pieces from today that I want you to remember. Those of you who are on this webinar who would enjoy doing a session with me, I'm more than happy to do that. What we'll do is we'll just explore, we'll see what your life is like, see how we might apply what we talked about today and how it might apply to you specifically. So just email me at the email address on your screen and we'll schedule a time just to have a conversation. Also, please remember that this webinar series continues tomorrow with Recession Proof Your Business, Managing Economic PTSD, that's Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and Ensuring the Future of Your Business. And next week, I'll be leading 2 webinars, one on the feeling that you just got where you are today because you got lucky. It's a little like imposter syndrome, but it's slightly different. And there will also be a webinar on easing transitions in your life and in your career. That one's going to be pretty cool. All right, I hope you'll join me next week. Thank you again for taking this time today. I'll see you next time.